This video is another primarily militia engineer task, and it covers Viet Cong helicopter landing zone booby traps. Now, this is not all inclusive. When I was doing research for about a week on this, I kept coming across references in the pamphlets and manuals from that time that said there were numerous examples that had been encountered across the country, and all those manuals and pamphlets would cover was the more common ones that they encountered. I do include one in here that is not even mentioned in the US manuals from the time, but it is mentioned in documentaries made in Vietnam about what the Viet Cong did. And I thought this looked really interesting. I'll include it in here. There is no information on that particular one in the United States because we didn't capture any. Now, put you in the mindset here. Remember, this is Vietnam, 1960s, 1970s. The communist guerrillas are operating primarily in the jungles, up in the mountains. These are areas that are hard to get to. The easiest way for the Allied troops to get there, the US, the South Vietnamese, the South Koreans, the Australians, New Zealanders, the easiest way for them to get at those guerrillas was by helicopter assault, by air assault. Well, they had to land at clear areas with the helicopters. They couldn't just drop them in through the trees. So it was fairly simple for the Viet Cong units to sit down, look at a map, search around their area, find the likely locations a helicopter could land, put scouts on those locations, put ambushes on those locations, hidden fortifications like bunkers covering those areas, and booby traps. So first off here, I got the ones that I was familiar with when I started doing the search. First off, this one seems to be the simplest, and that's the X pattern grenade trap. Now in this one, what you would have, and I got some training aids here to help me out. You'll have 4 poles set up in roughly a square. The size of the square, if you think about it, the distance between poles diagonally should be a little over 10 meters because the kill radius on a fragmentation grenade is 5 meters. So these are going to be at least 10 meters apart diagonally. And then attached to these poles, you had a tin can with a hand grenade inside. The pin is pulled on this grenade. Tied around the neck on this would be some wire, some vines, some rope, some type of twine, whatever that unit had available. Obviously, that stuff was tied around the neck before you remove the pin, and it was not tied around the safety spoon, just around the neck here between the fuse and the body. So what would happen in this one? These would be set up in grids around the landing zone, hopefully spread far enough apart that one goes off, it's not going to automatically set off the other nearby. But these will be set up around in a not a set pattern around the landing zone. It'll get put on the locations that were the most ideal for a helicopter to get land on. The helicopter would come in, and it would either, the tail would catch one or more of these ropes or land somewhere in the square here, and then it would start pulling those grenades out of those cans under pressure onto the wire, the vines, or the rope going between each can. And then 3 to 5 seconds later, those hand grenades start going off. Now, some of these could be camouflaged, obviously, by attaching vines to them. Get them to grow up and that stuff, maybe look like small trees and saplings as camouflage. But American GIs, especially pilots, would look at the LZ as they're coming in. If they seen a regular pattern out there, they seen poles, that LZ is booby trapped. Now the next one, this one was a bit harder to figure out. Grenade daisy chain. So we had the same concept for poles. On each pole, there is tied a hand grenade. Now this could be an American Mark II. It could be an American M25. Or it could be a Russian F1. Now on these poles, you have the grenade is tied directly to the pole, right around the neck up here to hold it in place. Then you had some type of tripwire. Typically, that's what it sounded like worked the best on this. Went from each pole. Now, the tripwire was tied, it looks like, and I can't guarantee this, 4 to 5 times around the body of the grenade and over the safety lever. So it was tied across here, holding this down, and it would be held on tight. All the way around, and then my guess on this is roughly center on one of these sides, you're going to have a tie, and that tie is probably going to be a square knot, or it's also referred to as a reef knot. That's a knot that does not come apart easily. So they would go through, make sure everything's nice and taut. Make that tie over there. Then they would go through, pull the pins from all 4 grenades. So now we have, the only thing that's keeping these from going off is the tripwire wrapped around the body and the safety lever on each pole. Now as a helicopter would come in, all they got to do is break one of those pieces of tripwire. As soon as it breaks one, that takes the tension off the wire on the grenades, and they start unspooling. At which point, the safety lever starts flying and the fuses start counting off. Even if it's something as simple as they come in and they hit one of the poles and knock it over, that's going to take the tension off of the wire here, that it'll start loosening up for the 2 grenades nearest to that pole. And then when those go off, that takes off the tension on the line for the last pole also. This one down on the ground potentially is going to go off also, as that tension is removed from the tripwire. Now the way I came across how this one was set up is they're actually employed this in the jungle also over trails. They would put them essentially as rectangles over the trail, hidden up in the trees. 3 of them would be prepped like this, and then one of them would be prepped with the pin is still inside it. The tripwire is tied around that grenade, but not over the safety lever, just over the body of it. So just inside this area, not over this, on that one grenade. And then they would have it set up where the pin would get pulled by a tripwire down on the ground. That one grenade on the one corner would go off, and then that would loosen up the wire to set off the other ones kind of in series over the tops of the heads of the soldiers walking along that path. So I put 2 and 2 together on that one, figured they probably did it the same way on the landing zone, just had to figure out how did they booby trap that 4th grenade. And that's when it occurred to me, just put a tie on the damn tripwire, making sure you got sufficient pressure on all of the safety levers. Now the next ones here all work by the power of wind. The wind coming off of the rotor on the helicopter. This first one, propeller mine. You have a tree or a pole on the side of the LZ, or several of them. A hole is drilled straight through the tree, and a straight stick is put through there, or a piece of rod, and you make sure that that rod would spin freely inside the hole, so the hole is sufficiently large enough it's not going to bind up. On one end of it, facing the landing zone, they had an improvised propeller. This propeller was made out of scrap metal, it looked like from the pictures. Propeller is attached to the shaft. Coming off of that propeller is a piece of twine or communications wire or rope or vine going down to some type of firing device. Now, some of the pictures I've seen on this for reenactments, they attached it to grenades, but Vietnam veterans were commenting on those pictures saying that's not correct. That it wasn't attached to a grenade, it was attached to a firing device. Say something like this fake one here, a pole firing device, so we'd have that rope attached to this. This went down either into a piece of ordnance, like a mortar round, an artillery shell, or a bulk piece of explosives, or some type of fragmentation mine, a directional mine, like a captured American Claymore, or a Russian Mon 50, or a Vietnamese-made DH-10, or some other, or a DH-5. They also made their own versions of the Claymore. Attached to that, or something that I did come across some references on, you had the firing device, and then connected to that would be deck cord. That deck cord would run to a series of mine or ordnance just inside the edge or inside the landing zone. So the helicopter comes in, the wind is blowing the trees, blowing the wind, leaves on the trees, it starts spinning that propeller. As that's spinning, it's making this rope tighter and tighter and tighter until it pulls that pin on the firing device, setting off our daisy chain of ordnance around the landing zone. This next one, not as common. I did come across a few references on it, and also variation. Parachute grenade trap. So with this one, we have fragmentation grenade is attached to a pole inside the landing zone. Length of this pole, I think I seen it, it said it was about 4 feet in length, give or take. They made sure it was down low enough that it would not be seen by the helicopter crews as they do the first flyover to check the LZ. It would be hidden inside the brush in the grass. You would have the safety pin weakened, and tied to the safety pin you had a parachute that was made out of paper, plastic, or some type of light cloth. Or maybe they were using the parachutes off of our parachute flares that we would use to light our perimeters at night. So that was tied to the pole ring. When the helicopter would come in, it's creating all that wind across the landing zone. That wind is going to get caught by our little parachute here, and it's going to pull out this already weakened safety pin. And then the spoon is going to fly. 3 to 5 seconds later, those grenades start going off on those poles. Now, there was a report from like 66 to 68 from the United States Marine Corps, where they had a young kid come in to them when they were on patrol. And he told a story about how the VC came in, grabbed him, threatened him, and taught him how to set up parachute grenade traps, but that one was a little different on how they taught him. What they taught him on that one was take the grenade, wrap the rope around here multiple times, or the tripwire, whatever they gave them, around here multiple times. That wire was attached to the parachute. The safety pin, the safety lever was held down tight by that rope, and it would set down on the ground like this, with the grenade keeping pressure on the rope to keep it from coming off, the parachute coming off over the top, and then pull the pin. And he was given a bag of grenades, materials for making the parachutes, and told to put them all over the landing zone. Essentially like an easy comparison to for in America and the West on this, like a fragmentation grenade Easter egg hunt, hiding these all over the LZ. As the helicopters would come in, that parachute would catch the wind coming off the blades, start pulling it, and these grenades would start rolling around in the grass until the spoon went free and the parachute blew away. Same effect. Now also on here, this is the one I got from a Vietnamese documentary, from a clip on that someone had uploaded. This was ingenious as hell, and I cannot find any technical reports on this or it mentioned in any ordnance manual anywhere, other than just a little 1 or 2 sentence reference. There's no technical information on this. But what the Viet Cong would do, they would take their homemade DH-10 mines, which the Russians copied into the MON 100, and they also made larger versions, which the Russians copied into the MON 200. They would lay them down in the landing zone. And then they would attach a fuse to it through the front of the mine here. And on this fuse, 2 what looked like metal leaves coming off of this. Now, how this worked. The helicopter blast is coming in, down and hitting the ground. And then once it hits the ground, it's going to start going every which direction to the side. These little leaves, one or both of them, would start lifting up. When it lifted up to the correct point, it activated this mini fuse here, setting off the mines. Now, if I can find some more technical info on how this fuse was done, maybe I'll do it as a historic ordnance series video. But as I said, there's very little on this one. There were lots of comments on the video clips where you find this type of mine setup. Comments left by Vietnam veterans and family members of Vietnam veterans. And they said they never heard of this. They personally never encountered this. So that tells me one of 2 things. One, that they just were never encountered in most areas. Or they were just a little too successful. There were no duds that the American troops would find laying on the ground. That all of them went off like they were supposed to. Now there's another one I did not do pictures on because it's really damn simple. The very first booby traps that the Viet Cong did of landing zones to take out helicopters, they would put out a tripwire. That tripwire would be attached to a bounding fragmentation mine, such as a Russian OZM-3 or OZM-4, or stolen American M16 bounding fragmentation mines. Now, along that tripwire, they would dig a hole, kind of shallow, and they would put a longer pole over the top of it. That pole would be loose in the hole. When the American helicopters would come in, it would either hit that pole, knocking it over on top of that tripwire, or the blast from the rotors would hit that pole, which was already leaning over the top of the tripwire. it would give it enough of a push, it would fall down, hitting the tripwire and then pulling the pin from the fuse, setting this off, and then the bounding fragmentation mine would shoot up and go off in the air. Conceivably, they would do the same type of thing with the propeller mines also. They could have them set up to fragmentation mines like this, with just the correct type of fusing to it for a pole fuse to set it off. Now, none of this information I gave you is classified. All of this information is from declassified manuals from the 1960s, 1970s, also declassified after action reports that were declassified in the 1980s about encounters of how the Viet Cong were countering helicopters. So none of this information I gave you is classified, is labeled secret anymore. Its security classification ran out decades ago. And I mention that because I did a video here recently on engaging helicopters with small arms, and there were people saying that the information I gave in that should be illegal to know. Guess what? It's not. Just like all of this information, it's not illegal to know. It's only illegal to employ this information unless you are actually in the situation this is called for. You are fighting a resistance scenario. You are fighting against an invading force or a tyrannical police force that's rounding people up at random just because of their religion, their skin color, their political preference, whatever it may be. Then you can use that information. You can also take this stuff, make mock-ups of it for use at reenactments. There are groups out there that set this stuff up to inform people on what the U.S. encountered in Vietnam. You can set up this type of stuff without the live ordnance for those, just to show people. Now I'm going to end this video with the tactic that the U.S. came up with on how to counter every last one of these traps. And you know what? The tactic is so simple, even an infantryman can do it. What the U.S. learned to do, especially after '66, when they were encountering a lot of traps that were taking out helicopters, if they were going to do a pre-planned operation into an area, they were going to come in on an LZ. Instead of just dropping the artillery around the forest edge around the LZ, they would also drop a few rounds inside the landing zone to set off any traps that are in there. This barrage would only last a few seconds, no more than 1 minute, because you didn't want to turn the ground into moon dust. You just send the rounds in there, let the shock waves go through, set off the different traps, neutralize them, destroy them, whatever. Then the American troops would come in on the helicopters, land, dismount, and get out of the LZ as fast as possible. But here you go. I gave you 6 different ways on how the Viet Cong fought against U.S. helicopter assaults. And these are the ones that they would put out in the landing zones long before the assault would come in. That's why they would fall in the engineer category and not just in the infantry category. Now, for all my engineer brothers in the Patriot and Militia movements, always remember essayons.